One of the questions that I have for you guys is, obviously you're not going to give counsel or tell people what to do, but you're going to maybe have a recommendation. What if a teenager, a young adult, a woman, someone has maybe said to her, "Hey, have you thought about getting assessed, or have you heard about autism or Asperger's? It seems like maybe this applies to you," and maybe that comes across as offensive at first, or "What are you talking about being on the autism spectrum?" um, what is your recommendation, or what are maybe your thoughts for her on just maybe going ahead and getting assessed? Or like if this was your friend coming to you and they were saying, "Hey, someone thinks I'm on the spectrum, isn't that crazy?" Or "Why would I want to get assessed?" Sid, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, if you're listening to this podcast and you are who my mom just described, and you're hoping this podcast is a sign, this is me telling you this is a sign. Go get evaluated, go get checked out. Especially if you've had more than one conversation with someone who cares about you. They're not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to slap a label on you for no reason. They're trying to help you. They're trying to help you heal a part of yourself that you don't know is hurting. Worst comes to worst, you get checked out and you don't come out with a label and you just have to keep trying again. It's not going to hurt anything. Just take the time and you owe it to yourself to get the answers that you're looking for.
Okay, what about you, Sarah?
Sydney kind of touched on it. There's a saying that I sort of stumbled upon along the way, and it makes sense to me that for the most part, neurotypical people don't usually spend quite a bit of time wondering if they're autistic to the point of deep researching or doing questionnaires countlessly online. I say do the questionnaires online, do the deep researching. It's not going to hurt. In fact, you're speaking of Dr. Natalie, and she has a great website called embrace-autism.com, has lots of ton of free online questionnaires for autism, and it actually provides scoring for free as well. So it can help you work through those kind of preliminary self-screening pieces if you're wondering. But then beyond that, I would encourage a wanderer to really partner with God to seek the truth and guidance in this process, and really surrender your feelings about it to him and seek his word on whether or not a formal diagnosis is relevant for his plan for your life. For me, it was mostly just because of career and to get the to get the courage to and the margin to be authentic with family and friends. But I've spoken with many others, like Molly said, right, to are more than happy to simply suspect it for themselves, and that in and of itself is sufficient. And honestly, as someone who's received a formal diagnosis, I've never felt the need to judge someone because they lacked an official diagnosis, right? And I would encourage others to remember that just because autism may end up explaining why you're struggling, why you view life a certain way, may it not hold you back from achieving God's will for your life. Everyone, whether they're neurotypical or not, is going to have challenges. And I just hope that the knowledge of your potential or confirmed neurodiversity will really help you to continue down the path of a growth mindset, and really help you to find ways to journey well and more comfortably if needed, and honestly just permission for it to look differently than it does for those typically if needed.
Okay. Julie, what about you? What are your recommendations?
I really wish that we all came with user manuals when we were born, because I think it would make things so much easier. For me, I am a big proponent of the more information, the better. I feel like I can do better when I have the most information, because then I can make the best choices. I did have a friend that came to me recently and suspected that she could be on the spectrum. And what I did was just talk to her a little bit about it. So if you have someone that you know that is already diagnosed or is self-diagnosed, run by them, what's the reason you think you might be on the spectrum. And I also sent her to, if you Google the list of female Asperger syndrome traits, the first image that comes up in the images is the list that I used, that I stumbled on, that really was eye-opening for me. So those are my recommendations.
All right, Molly, what about you? Since you're the one that you've self-identified, you don't have that official label or diagnosis, but it seems to resonate for you. What will your recommendation be?
I would recommend to take one first step, no matter how scary it will be. For me, that first step was reading online a bit, then talking to my husband. And that doesn't really sound very scary, does it? But it really was. It was a big deal. And I'm so glad that I did it. And to be encouraging, I found that the more times I did that, the more scary steps I took, the less scary those steps became.
I like that one next step because, you know, for any person, especially in adulthood, to think one thing about yourself all these years and then get this new information that does represent a different label or identification, that can take a bit to process. And so I want to kind of talk to the neurotypical spouse out there. I've had the experience where whether the wife or the husband is newly diagnosed or assessed, and sometimes there's this unrealistic expectation. Well, you know about this now, so like by next week you're going to be doing different things, right? You're going to read the books and you're going to understand, and like all your behaviors are going to change because now you have this new information and this label and identification. And for many people, first of all, it could take weeks to months just to process. One thing about autistic people that I know is they don't want to be a phony or a hypocrite or inauthentic and say something that they're not sure if that's the thing. Hence, Sarah, seeing two people on two countries, just make sure. I want to make sure, you know, this is the right label. And so sometimes for male or female, there is a little bit about what about this or what about this, or stigmas or myths or these stereotypes out there about autism. Or then once I decide to take that on, what do I think fits or what do I think doesn't fit? And then some time to really work through what does that mean? Like, well, then what was me and what's my character and what's this autism or Asperger thing? And so just giving people grace and space to kind of work that through and think it out. You've kind of heard each person, whether it was a neutral or kind of a roller coaster, it was a good thing, it was a bad thing. I've settled at neutral thing. It is a processing thing. And that's why when you start doing work with me, I will usually start you out one-on-one differently because you're on two different journeys at that beginning. Someone's doing an identity processing and the other one is saying, well, what does this mean about us, our marriage, and our family? So you're in two different spaces once this label kind of enters your world, unless with Sydney, who is bringing it into her relationship, kind of it's already known as something you're able to talk about at the beginning. So I will kind of toss that to you, Sydney. What do you think? You're the only one on the call that going into a marriage situation, you knew about it, you had that identity for 20 years before you're entering into marriage. How do you think that helps kind of knowing, and like what kind of things did you feel like your fiance or boyfriend to fiance needed to know about what it means to be marrying someone on the spectrum?
I think, first of all, I highly recommend pre-engagement counseling that we specifically worked on a lot with communication. My fight or flight, when I am anxious and kind of get in that stress mode, I shut down and I become conflict avoidant if I can. Versus he likes to talk about everything, which isn't a bad thing, but we had to learn how to work through it. I had to actually remember and make a conscious effort to use my words, which does not come naturally to me. And he's had to make a conscious effort to give me the space so I feel like I can say my words versus just talking to fill in the empty space. So I think going into it, we've learned how to work with each other. We're learning how to identify the little quirks and things like all couples have to go through while going into marriage, right? It's not neurodiverse specific. But I think going in just being upfront with who I am, this is what I know about myself. These are things that I know I need to work on. I'm not going to get it perfect all the time, and I need grace when I mess up. I think that having that conversation was extremely beneficial to our relationship.
Yes, a very wise person suggested that y'all get pre-engagement.
I'm not going to say who.
I'm just saying. So one of the reasons that women, girls are diagnosed later in life is because of masking and camouflaging. So this was not a question I put on y'all's list. So I'll just kind of open it up and see who wants to talk about that. But because we socialize girls differently than boys anyway in society to, be a hostess, be more chatty, all kinds of mean words pop up if you're a rude girl, because that is more inappropriate, to be rude or distant or not as chatty or extroverted in our society. So people mask or camouflage. So either Sydney specifically, I would say she would try to mimic people. Usually that was her thing. So you might try to mimic, you might just want to blend into the wall and camouflage. I want to kind of ask each of you, like, what's that like? And when did you kind of realize if or when you were masking that, oh, I was masking all that time. I didn't realize that I was, or that's that thing that I was doing. So I'll kind of go around our same order. Anything you want to talk about masking or camouflaging? Sid, do you remember anything about, trying to mask or camouflage?
I mean, I still do it at work sometimes. I am an introvert on the autism spectrum who has a very peoply job and can sometimes have a 30-minute conversation with the same person and just talking in circles over and over again. So there's definitely a point in the day where I am ready to go home. I am done. I am peopled out, but I still have 4 hours of the workday left. And so I have to put a little smile on my face and make sure that my floor stays positive, because I don't want to be known as the person that is constantly peopled out or is not fun to be around. So I'm 25 and I still do that. Um, Josh has actually learned when I am masking, when I'm not. There will be times where we've been at like family events, but I wasn't quite feeling the whole people situation. And he would actually pull me aside. He's like, I can tell you're masking. We can go if you're ready to go. So I haven't quite figured out like when I do it in some situations that are still new to me socially, like work, I'm very well aware when I mask. Church, if I had a rough night before, I'm very well aware if I'm masking or mimicking other people's behavior. But in new situations, like with his family, just haven't had a whole lot of them yet. I'm still learning, oh, I am masking. I should probably use my words and it's probably time to go home. But Josh is definitely more well aware of my masking than I am.
Sarah, what about you?
Do a whole podcast on this. I have a few thoughts. I would say I definitely masked most of my life. And I think that once I was diagnosed, it became very difficult for me to do that. It's like the wall had crashed. And I've also heard other people say that it became difficult for them to mask as well. And I would say that this kind of speaks to a difference maybe between not all boys and girls, but, that male-female presentation difference. In my experience, in my research, females are much more socially dismotivated in general, right? And so, and that wasn't really well understood because most of that clinical research that was done on boys, right? So that female presentation wasn't really identified for masking in that. And so when it comes to socializing, even learning how to socialize, it's our human nature and child development to learn by mimicking, right? But this is just much more pronounced in females with autism. And so we tend to create this framework in our minds of how social interactions should go based on what we see with others, but we're not always as successful in being able to adapt those pieces into a scale that can vary between environments and personalities, which will lead to misunderstandings, conflict, maybe even losses of relationships. That's pretty common for us. And so there can also be, again, not for all females, but for a lot of us, there can be this hypervigilance with understanding social cues, which is actually, most people don't understand. They think, oh, we just don't know social cues at all. Sometimes we're actually just hypervigilant in an effort to avoid embarrassment. Maybe we've had previous unsuccessful social interactions. So we're just really almost traumatized from it. And so it can just be so exhausting because it's just not very natural. It takes a lot of effort unless we're in a relationship with somebody that we're really close with and we can be more comfortable. We're hyper aware of body language, tone, facial expressions, which it can also help if we're in the middle of a conversation and we think maybe it's going sideways, then we have to sort of grasp at straws mentally to how to, redirect it. It's like putting a puzzle together every time you're speaking with someone. And I have something I call post-socializing anxiety, PSA, where, afterwards it can be for hours or days where you're re-examining every possible piece of that interaction, maybe a misstep or a cue that you saw from someone that was confusing. It can lead to shame and self-confidence issues, which then can trigger maybe harmful coping mechanisms, maybe a shutdown, mental or physical, where you maybe need to be non-functional for a period of time. Maybe you've heard of like burrito hour, where you just need to go and not people, and not having enough of that recovery time can really create burnout and even a significant reduction in a willingness to just engage in socializing in general, which creates more isolation. And I just want to say one more thing about daughters specifically. Like, I would say as a mother to 2 children with autism, that keep an eye on their interactions socially, both inside the home and outside the home. If you can, with school or work or social functions, gather as much information as you can, whether they're masking in those locations, because then you can help work together with them to feel more comfortable. Kind of like Sydney was saying, maybe that means discussing strategies on how to advocate for themselves in an appropriate way, or maybe based on capacity or age, you can, with agreement, you can advocate on their behalf. And I would also say that this is really important to help support good mental health for them in both the long and short term, but really, really key for prevention of potential future risks of getting into dangerous situations. Maybe they're masking to the point where they're missing, really concerning things. Autistic females are certainly at an elevated risk of manipulation or worse, abusive relationships or assault. So really equipping them early with education about the difference between masking and just, advocating for yourself can really be a significant tool to avoid those negative outcomes.
Thank you for sharing all of that. You can tell another clinician, another person
So passionate.
doing that research. Julie, what about you? Masking or camouflaging? Did you experience that? What was it like when you kind of figured out, oh, that's that thing I was doing? Or what was your experience?
I think that I am still trying to figure all of that out. I have not really focused on the whole masking issue. And I think it's something that I need to look at more. I tend to be a genuine person, and I'm not interested in being fake. So I'm not sure to what degree I have masked, except for if I had to go to like a work party or something where I really didn't want to be there. Like my husband's work parties. Things I have to do like that, trying to remember to be nice to people or whatever. I don't know. I'd rather just stand there and be a wallflower. It's not my thing. But yeah, I'm not really sure. And I just forgot what I was gonna say in addition
That's
to
okay.
that.
That's all right. You answered the question. What about you, Molly? Because in other discussions, we've talked about being authentic and, not really caring so much about fitting in has been part of your story. So do you mask? Have you masked? Or what's that been like for you?
Yeah, as a child and young adult, I would say I did not mask. I am myself. I like myself. If you don't like me, that's your problem, not mine. And you looking back, I might have had a happier, social relation type of life had I masked, because definitely when you choose to be the way I am, you are a little different and you know it and you're okay with it. Most people are uncomfortable with that. You spend a little bit of time getting to know somebody and they're just, as my husband would say, they're just not quite sure what to do with that because it's not really the norm. But what I would say, just listening to you ladies talk here, is that I'm sure, being unaware of masking, that I've done that a lot in my marriage, mostly in social settings, mostly being a pastor's wife. I probably wasn't even aware I was doing it. It was just knowing that my husband had hopes, desires, expectations for a certain environment, and I was not going to be able to live up to that. And I certainly couldn't go in with my attitude, you don't like me, I don't care. I couldn't do that. So that's definitely something where I believe the masking was there. And my husband has not been pastoring for 7 years. And That's
You
not
can
a
see
space.
pastor's wife roll off.
I don't have to own masking anymore. And I'm sure it comes up from here and there. But to be honest, I'm sure neurotypical people mask too. Like I'm sure we all are in our different environments, but it does not, thankfully, like override my life. It's not a big part of my world.
Yeah, I was
Thankfully.
going to say we usually use the terms mask or camouflage in reference to people on the spectrum, but neurotypicals can too. I mean, long before masking and camouflage, there was a phrase called being two-faced or being one way in one situation and being inauthentic. So sometimes, I would say for autistic individuals, it's more to fit in or social anxiety or I'm not knowing what to do. I would say it's actually worse, I think, sometimes for neurotypicals. If you're doing it, might be to be deceptive and manipulative or to put out a false persona or image management. So it's usually not because of anxiety or uncertainty. My last question as we go around and close our time together, do you tell people in your church community or your Christian community, then why or why not? Like, is your church community or Christian community safe and an open space? Sid, what about you?
Yeah, I actually lead an all women's Bible study. We range in age from 21 to 37. And ever since I took on this leadership role in my Bible study, I've been very honest with my ladies about who I am and just my leadership style might be a little bit different than they're used to, just because I have a little extra quirk here and there. My group is very accepting. I have actually a licensed counselor in my group. Um, One of my ladies actually had the courage through me sharing my testimony and my journey. She actually shared with the group a couple weeks ago that she was also diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when she was 10. So she felt safe enough to share that part of her story with us a couple weeks ago. And we have teachers and ABA therapists and nurses and all sorts of different backgrounds. So autism is not anything new or crazy or radical for anyone in that group by any means. Everyone is super supportive of each other. And then even in like the actual church setting itself, when we go sit on Sunday morning, there are people obviously not in my Bible study that are going to be in church. And you know, when it's come up relevant in conversation, I share it. There's been a couple times where there's been some younger families that have kind of sat in the young adult section, and sometimes the kids are, you know, a little fidgety in their chair behind me, and I can kind of hear the little swish, swish, swish of their bobbling in the seat behind me. And, you know, the moms are like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't, she's distracting. I'm like, no, she's totally fine. Like, you know, I sometimes fidget too. That's why I have my little fidget ring. And that kind of sparks like, oh my gosh, like, where'd you get it? Like my kid's ADHD or my kid's on the spectrum. So when it's relevant, I bring it up. But it's definitely a safe place for me. And I'm very fortunate for that.
Yes. And I prayed about that, when she moved to Nebraska. Please, Lord, let her get to an inclusive community. And if you attend Bible study at Sydney's house, you will have all the fidgets and squishy things and Play-Dohs and all kinds of fun things to do if you need that during Bible study. Sarah, what about your community? Are you open about it or is it on an as-need basis?
It's really interesting. There's a bit of a dichotomy because um, our personal church life has transitioned recently. And so there was a big shift. I won't get into it, but basically there are some people from a previous church that we were at are now kind of split into sort of 2 or 3 different churches. And we've sort of just come into this community, one of the communities recently. And so some of them know just from being in personal relationship with me, or, you know, I did post it on my personal social media page at one point, but I don't typically engage new people and announce it. I just either assume it's going around the church as a rumor, or it's just staying between the people that already know. But ironically, in my professional life, part of my private practice has a ministry stream where I work directly with churches to support their children's ministry with the autism and ADHD piece that Sydney's literally just explaining. And so I kind of lead with my neurodiversity as someone who can, speak from both lived experience and a professional standpoint. So it's kind of both, and it's just in different ways.
All right. What about you, Julie? What's your community like?
I'm not the kind of person that just is like, hey, everybody, I'm autistic. I don't have any reason to talk about it unless it comes up. And I don't really differentiate between my church community and any other person I would meet anywhere or any other friends. So, if it comes up in conversation, I'll say it like it's not a big deal. Oh, well, I'm autistic too, or whatever, it's like, but otherwise, there's not really a need to bring it up. And I'm not really concerned. I'm kind of like Molly, like I'm kind of like, this is who I am. And if you don't like it, that's just the way it is. I do post about it on my Facebook page. So if you are friends with me on Facebook, you're going to see it. And I don't hold back on there. I mean, that's basically me. You're getting unfiltered me if you're looking at my Facebook page. So, but otherwise, I'm not yelling from the rooftops.
All right, Molly, what about you? When you decided to tell people or be open about that, what was that like in your Christian or church community? Or have you?
That is a very sensitive subject in our family, and I really want to be sure to honor my husband. We just had different views when I initially discovered this about myself, different views to share it or not. And my husband, I think it's just being a pastor and being a church planter and how stressful life was, that he just wasn't comfortable with that. And I was completely comfortable. So talk about masking. Like I had to probably for 10 plus years just keep it very small and be sure that it wasn't inside the church. And honestly, I didn't really understand why. That was hard for me, and it was confusing. And my husband and I have had conversations about it, and we're in a different place now. And we recently actually just did a podcast with a friend of ours a few months ago, and that was sort of a first time like coming out and really talking publicly about it. But the delay in that was much more my husband just having a really hard time, just, I don't know, accepting that or making that public knowledge. That was hard for him.
So I would be remiss if I didn't kind of talk about something that came out. Well, it just landed on my feed and it was very disturbing to me. And it was a clip by John MacArthur talking how ADHD, things like autism and OCD and post-traumatic stress and all of those things aren't real. They're just behavior problems and lack of willpower, and essentially gave the old-timey advice of like pray more, seek good counsel, get in the word more. And it's people who say things like that make it very difficult for people to be honest about their authentic self, to be able to tell people when they're on the spectrum or have ADHD, or if they're struggling with mental health or mental illness and they're put on their church mask. And, why would you say something like that and tell someone if they're going to think you're sinful or demon possessed, which is like the worst. So I just kind of want to challenge you out there if you're listening and you're a church leader or a biblical counselor that doesn't believe in psychological labels. It's very damaging to say something so broadly that it's a sin or it's just a behavior issue or a willpower issue. So I just want to challenge you in your thinking to hear that, everyone's experience here, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, you want to be your authentic self. And you want to be able to do whatever your purpose and calling is, and you want a nice or a safe church environment and church community to be able to open up to. So I want to thank all of you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all that you have shared. And everyone, that's a wrap of the Just the Guys takeover of Just the Girls. And be listening out for more interviews with women on the spectrum that will be coming out this year. You can go back in our catalog and look up Dr. Natalie Engelbrecht, who we have mentioned today. She was on earlier episodes, and she kind of talks a little bit more clinically about some of the things that we've talked about, including her own later in life diagnosis as a clinician. And surprise, surprise, she also was on the spectrum. So we'd like to remind you always that there is hope for your future, and you're not alone on your journey.